What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the Cardfight Casual channel, and today, as you can see before you, we have the brand new OR Exculpate the Blaster that you get with every copy of Vanguard EX that you buy, now available for the Nintendo Switch on the Play Store, not the Play Store, but the Nintendo Switch online store, and as physical copies. Now, you only get this if you get a physical copy of Vanguard EX, but I actually don't have a Switch, and I didn't actually pre-order Vanguard EX, but I got this as a single because I just think the old artwork of Exculpate the Blaster looks gorgeous, and it fits really well, the one copy that I need, in my Gancelot Blaster Blade deck, which you will see right after this as I slot it in. But yeah, this is the OR Blaster Blade. It looks, well, the old art, I definitely prefer the old art to the new art. Some people may disagree, but that borderless text right there really sells the whole thing if you weren't convinced. And this is now available for, I think, the limited time, because probably it only goes out for the first few copies of Vanguard EX, but we're just going to get into it. Got this today, and I protected it with a top loader and everything on the way home. And hopefully you'll be able to see what it looks like inside of the sleeve that will go into my deck. So that is what the card looks like. It is really nice looking card right there, and we're going to put that straight into the sleeve. Sleeve once. And of course it's right now perfectly straight because it's brand new. Well, might be a little bit slightly bent, but that is what it looks like. And we're just going to move on straight to the deck profile because I haven't done one of these, and the deck has now been updated. So starting off, we have one copy of Exculpate the Blaster, which is really useful because you will be facing quite a lot of XL clans in this meta. Narukami still checks quite a lot of things, so you'll see that. Murakumo is actually one of the biggest problems right now, and that's why we run Exculpate the Blaster, because it can get rid of your opponent's entire board. And if they Hyuga your entire field away, this is kind of a good card to try and hit them back without, having to drop the whole hand right off the bat. So yeah, he's a pretty good card at tackling XL clans, but not really that essential to get every single turn, every single game, because he does bring you back to Blaster Blade, which is pretty bad against those clans. But we're going to run through. We have 4 Gancelot. If you guys don't know what this guy does, his skill is that on Vanguard and Rearguard, on Vanguard, if you are a grade 3 and your opponent's also grade 3, then your Blaster Blades on the front row Rearguard circles become Vanguard circles, the ones that your Blaster Blades are on. And then the first skill is that on your Rearguard and Vanguard circles, your Blaster Blades get plus 10,000 power, which makes him really useful for powering up Blaster Blades. And he's really meant to be used with Force 2, you can tell, because it gives you that basically free 10k power and really just helps to push. And of course, if you have if you have 2 Blaster Blades on either side, you do get 4 cards per turn, because Blaster Blade gets 1 drive, and then the Gancelot himself has 2. So he's pretty good at recovering hand size. And of course, if your Blaster Blades on the Rearguard have 4 other Rearguards, not including the Blaster Blades on the Rearguard circle, then you also do get an additional critical on that Blaster Blade. And next up, we have 2 King of Knights Alfred. Now, a lot of people don't like to run Alfred anymore just because when you ride him onto Blaster Blade, which is something you can do, and most other people just run Monarch Sanctuary Alfred or Alfred early because you get to call the Blaster Blade out. But this deck focuses very heavily on taking as much advantage as you possibly can and kind of surprising the opponent. And so that's why we start off with this, because King of Knights Alfred, he has one very important skill, which is that he can counterblast 1 and call a Blaster Blade out. Now, there are other cards that do this in this deck, but I do feel that King of Knights is a really good starter, because if you ride Gancelot on turn 3 and your opponent is still not at grade 3 yet, essentially what you have is a vanilla Vanguard, and on the Rearguard, if you do have a Blaster Blade, which you have to have in your hand or searched out in any other way, all it gets is plus 10,000 power, which is not bad, but I rather have the ability to tutor something with the skill and to have a 10k boost on the Vanguard. So if you decide to go with Force 2, your Vanguard can swing 23, or with a boost 30 or 31, without actually having to call on any other stuff that boosts your Vanguard's power, because most of the time your Gancelot column is going to be the least scary if you play Force 2. And so yeah, that's why I play 2 copies of Alfred, the King of Knights. I only play 1 copy of Monarch Sanctuary Alfred. Of course, you can play 2 or 3 recommended playing at 2, and he's really good because he gives you a defensive option if you have to ride over the current Vanguard Gancelot, and you have the 2 Blaster Blades at the side, which can be 10k interceptors. So if you want to play defensively but have a balance of defense and offense, Monarch Sanctuary Alfred is a really good card. Now the reason why I only play one of him is because simply there's no space in this deck, and you'll see why very soon. But he can be ridden on the rear guard, or rather the side Vanguard Blaster Blade. And you can use his skill to counter +1, so +1, get that Blaster Blade and call him to the separate side of the field, which is really, really good. And he does get the 1k plus 15k 1 crit extra if you do have the King of Knights in the soul. The reason why I only play one again, it's a really good card, but I need to leave space for the sort of surprise finisher of the deck. Is I do play 2 copies of Soul Saver Dragon, and Soul Saver Dragon is really, really good, mostly because you surprise your opponents because they're thinking you're running the typical advantage engine of King of Knights Alfred, or Alfred early at the most, which gives you extra cards, maybe extra power, but most people will be prepared for that. What they're not prepared for would be 3 full columns of, if you're playing Force 2, Force 2 Soul Saver Dragon. If you have a full field powered up, at the very least that's hitting 50k in every single column, and this is a devastating finisher, especially if your opponent is preparing all the whole game to take maybe 1 or 2 Blaster Blades, or they have maybe just enough shield to guard Blaster Blade no pass if you're playing Force 2, and this is a really great finisher. And of course, moving on to grade 2s, as you do, I do play 4 copies of Blaster Blade. I have as many arts as I can afford. So we have my favorite art, the OR Blaster Blade, the IMR Blaster Blade, and the RE Blaster Blade. Of course, he is no surprise. He's the core function of the deck. You need him to make this deck survive, or allow this deck to survive, and he basically gets the extra drive on the rear guard when it becomes a Vanguard, and he gets the extra crit if you have 4 other rear guards besides him. What I actually really like to do is to put him on a Force 2 marker and not put another Blaster Blade, so you do lose out 1 card, but instead you're swinging with a 3 crit Blaster Blade on the rear guard that they can't afford to just take. Or even if he's got Blaster Blade, even if you have Blaster Blade on the side, without the extra innate crit, you can use his, him basically to pressure your opponent with the extra drive check. So always a good card to have and essential for making the deck run. Now I'll also play 1 copy of the Knight of Truth Gordon just as an additional booster for Blaster Blade. I would play more copies of him, but I have to make space for other cards. If you don't know what he does, he gives 5k to all Vanguard and Rearguard Blaster Blades on your turn, and if he's in the same column as Blaster Blade, he gains boost for that turn. Now the thing about Gordon is that if you want to use him to rush early game and say you put him behind the Vanguard, unfortunately you do have a grade 2 behind the Vanguard, and he is really useful if you're playing a lot of Force 2, but because of the Soul Saver twist, I only have space for 1 of him. Next up, I play 4 copies of Bedivere, and Bedivere is just an all-round good card. When he's boosted by the Knight of the Knight of Friendship K, he gets plus 3k, and the K also gives plus 3k, so he hits 24 in any column. If you choose to go Force 1, he's really, really good because that 34k column forces at least 2 cards from your opponent's hand to guard, making this pretty much one of the strongest attacking columns, and pretty useful for any deck. And his second skill is that if you call him on the rearguard from hand, you can also call a Knight of... K from hand and draw a card, so he works as kind of a plus engine as well. Next up, we have 2 copies of High Dog Breeder Akane, and I play 2 Akane because I think she's just great. Comparing Akane and Bedivere, usually people don't run both. I chose 2 because, believe it or not, Bedivere is good when you have the full combo, but he's also very combo reliant. Whereas Akane, you can just splash her in, that's why you can run her at 2 copies, whereas getting Bedivere off, you usually need to run him at 4 copies along with 4 copies of K. Akane is a lot more flexible, and because Pongo does have his own skill on the rearguard, Akane might be useless, but the second piece of that will never be completely useless. Also very important for Soul Saver Dragon Soul Charge. And if you didn't know what Pongo's skill was, here he is. Now Pongo has a skill that when he's called to rearguard, if he's called in the same column as another unit, then you can Soul Charge 1. If you Soul Charge a trigger unit, he gets plus 5k. Just pretty standard stuff. It's a trigger. It gives you some advantage for soul charging a trigger, but most of the times you just want to build up your soul for that big soul saver turn. Yeah, that's pretty much all it does. Right now I'm playing 3 Pluck Enchanter, and this card I really like. Well, first of all, because it is a counter charger. But of course, it only works in conjunction with Blaster Blade because Bushiroad likes building things around Blaster Blade now. But with the first RP countercharger that we have, it is highly limited. You can only countercharge if you have no face-up damage, and you can only use the skill once a turn when you call a Blaster Blade. Now, this deck doesn't really have a lot of ways to call Blaster Blade, but ideally you have you can use his skill by calling him to the rear guard when you're on grade 1. So maybe your field looks like this on grade 1. And when you ride over with a grade 2 Blaster Blade, you can immediately use his skill if your opponent has anything to retire. Subsequently, you can also soul charge 1 and countercharge the 1 damage that you had to hopefully rush your opponent down on Blaster Blade. So he's a really good card, and you really want to see him by turn 1, latest by turn 2, or latest turn 3, I guess. Especially if you're riding into the King of Knights, you get a free counter blast that comes with the Blaster Blade you call. Since that essentially will be free. So that's why I run him at 3 copies. Also, he soul charges every time you call a Blaster Blade once per turn. So if you have 2 copies of him, even though you can only counter charge once, you do get to, or once for each of them, you do get to soul charge once as well. Another good card for building up Soul Saver Dragon's Soul Blast. Now, because I run the King of Knights Alfred, I only play 2 copies of Tristan. And a lot of people will probably debate about this because Tristan is such a useful card. You can get Blaster Blade from your deck, but because I don't play any ways to get Blaster Blade back from the drop zone except for the Monarch Sentry Alfred, the single copy that I play, I do find that Tristan isn't really that useful. And usually when you see Tristan, you usually have to ride her as a grade 1 or call her to rush on grade 2. And you are wasting 1 Tristan anyway, so I figured might as well put in an extra Pluck Enchanter or Pongo. So just 2 copies of Tristan. If you go second, and you get to ride Gancelot on your first grade 3 ride, then she is really useful to call those Blaster Blades out and get as many pluses as you can. Of course, if you're using her in conjunction with the Pluck Enchanter, then you do get that counter blast back, and you maybe get a free retire, because at that point your opponent will probably have quite a lot of rear guards. And for the last of the grade 1s, we have 4 copies of K. His skill set, when you call him to the rear guard from hand, you can counterblast 1, search your deck for a Bedivere and call him to the front. Any rearguard circle actually, and of course, like I mentioned before, he makes a 24k column with Bedivere, and if you have another Force 1 marker, he forces at least 2 cards from your opponent's hand, and if you don't have it, it's a 24k must guard 15k shield, but it consistently gets that out, and of course you do get the draw if you have both of them in your hand. But most of the times, you probably won't be able to get it off that often, the draw skill, because having both in hand is quite difficult. But if you're rushing early game, having 1 Bedivere and 1 K alongside your Blaster Blade, and perhaps 1 Pluck Enchanter, is a great way to get 4 rear guards for your Blaster Blade without losing too much hand, since you do get 1 card refunded if you call Bedivere and then K, and then you get a +1 because you're calling another Bedivere onto the field. And at the end of the day, you're just trying to fill up the circles for Blaster Blade's extra crit on the Vanguard, secondary Vanguard circle to go off. So it doesn't really matter what is there, and you can always intercept away with that extra Bedivere. So he also helps to thin the deck, I guess, because you're getting those grade 2s out. So a really good card, definitely the better of the 2, K better than Bedivere, but of course you have to run them as a set. And last of all, my trigger lineup is as such. We have 3 Flogel, 2 Epona, and 2 Liu. Right now I'm playing 7 crit and 5 draw with the 5 PGs and then 4 heal. The reason why I chose this lineup is because I do feel like that extra draw trigger does help you hit those cards that you need, because Bedivere and K, first of all, they do require each other if you want to get the full plus, and you also want to be drawing into your pieces like Soul Saver Dragon, Gancelot if you need it, King of Knights Alfred early game if you do want to hit that first turn right and get as much value as you possibly can before your opponent hits their grade 3 turn. Then you want to run at least 5 draw triggers. And crits are pretty abundant in this deck since there is Force 2 and there's also Blaster Blade on the pseudo Vanguard circle, which gives you an extra crit. So yeah, that's pretty much the whole deck, and of course I play Barkle as my starter. So I guess the reason why this deck is different is because of that surprise element, and I think it's a really good thing, a really good combo for taking people out when they least expect it. They're probably wondering why you play Akane, Soul Chargers. Another option besides Gordon is to play, of course, the grade 2 Loading Angel, which is a card that if you have 5 or more rear guards, actually I got a copy right here, you can Counterblast 1, send him to Soul if you have 5 or more units on field, and then draw 2 cards, which is probably the best draw engine in the game. But unfortunately, I couldn't find space to fit him in. If you want to play him over Gordon, that's good too. But I do feel that the extra power can really help out sometimes. And rushing early game if you have him. So yeah, that's pretty much the deck review. I hope you enjoyed the cards, the deck review, and of course, here's one last look at that OR Exculpate the Blaster. Anyways, that's pretty much it. As always, have fun, and remember, it's okay to play casual.